Hey, and welcome to today's video. I'm reviewing the recently released Kill the Shadow played only on my Steam Deck OLED. As always, just a few things to consider before we start. I'm using my Steam Deck, so bear in mind some pros and cons will be unique to me playing on that. If you're playing using a legit rig or a toaster, it'll be different for you too. I played this game from release and have clocked about 29 plus hours with one complete playthrough under my belt, so some issues or problems I've had may be patched out by the time this is uploaded. However, this is my honest experience at the time, and so it stays in the review. We'll start with gameplay first, then get into visuals and other things before finishing up with the too long didn't read wrap up. So what is Kill the Shadow? It's a game developed by Shadowlight and published by Phoenix Game, released on Steam on the 5th of August 2026. On its Steam page, it's described as a detective game with multiple endings, featuring 2.5D pixel art and semi-open exploration and investigation. Play as Lucas, a former police officer, alongside a mysterious shadow who can see the past. Described as a detective game, if you're into those, you will love this. If I had to compare it to another game, I'd say this feels more like a violent, mature themed Phoenix Wright game with free roaming exploration. Gameplay is split into three main parts: dialogue and character interactions, investigation and deduction, and finally exploration. A lot of this game will require you to speak with many different characters and go through a lot of dialogue. You will have a choice of how to respond either with dialogue or actions. Interestingly, the game allows you to also remain silent quite a bit. I think that's a very underutilized option in many RPG and narrative heavy games. Oftentimes you're forced to keep saying things when really silence feels most appropriate. I like that some response options also feel a bit more like they're made for the player rather than the character, if that makes sense. Sometimes when you're playing RPGs, you wish you could just really tell a character to F right off or even smack them, and funnily enough, this game allows you to do that a few times. Depending on how you handle your dialogue choices and actions, the consequence of those will affect the way the story unfolds and future choices. One of them could be whether a character likes you or not, and in a crucial moment where you may need to get aid or call upon someone for a favor, they will respond according to their experience with you. The dialogue branch is simple. It's nothing like Mass Effect, for example, where you have multiple options for good or bad karma along with neutral options and skill checks. For this game, you've probably got max 3 choices at any one time. I didn't mind this. The choices given were sufficient, I felt. If you're someone wanting more choice and complexity with your dialogue tree, then best keep in mind that this isn't that game. Oftentimes, your interaction with characters will naturally lead you to exploration. It's common when doing a quest for or with a character that will often result in you having to complete a sub or side quest for another character. This forces you to go from point A to B, then C, and back again, and so on. The environments are sandbox style. It's the same approach as the Yakuza games. You're in an environment you can explore, and as you progress through the story and do more quests, more of the environment opens up with more opportunities with different characters also opening up. You'll also find things in the environment during your exploration as well. There's a cool inspection feature in the game that reminds me a lot of Resident Evil. You can inspect an item more closely, being able to zoom in and out while also rotating the object. So instead of just pressing a button to search a desk, the game lets you look at the desk, look at the objects on it, and attempt to open drawers if possible, and sometimes you can even find other clues that may not be very obvious. I really like this feature. Again, just makes this game feel more like you're actually investigating, being able to inspect things instead of just pressing a button and having the game say there's something here for you to look at. Speaking of investigations, that's the third element of the foundational gameplay elements of this game. Your character Lucas, being a former police officer, means naturally you will be investigating people and situations whether you wanted to or not. During your interactions with other characters and exploration, you will gather information which you will use to put together a theory on what's happened and who might be responsible. The excellent part of investigating is that the game encourages you to try and assemble the clues yourself. You will have to link each piece of evidence to each other. For example, one piece of evidence might be someone's testimony that they saw a figure by the crime scene. You then have to link who that figure really is to a person from a list of potential suspects you have identified. The other interesting part of investigating is that if you don't gather enough information or miss clues or don't speak to everyone possible surrounding the investigation, your theory will have holes, ultimately meaning you've got nothing really solid to go on, and this may result in a failed investigation. Investigations themselves may span several storylines. You may think you've completed an investigation, but then find out that a separate one that you're investigating later on ends up yielding missing info for a previous one, and then finally the clues actually fully come together. So there is this element of being at the mercy of life, and then even with all the best intentions, attention and thorough investigating, their truth may ultimately be something different than what the evidence at the time first led you to believe. There are also basic skill checks for some dialogue options. There are 3 skills with replenishable resources: strength, spirit, and charm. These skill checks also affect the way you interact with the world. Charm allows you to be very persuasive with people, spirit is for intelligence skill checks, and strength is for confrontation and physical acts. This gives you some room on how you want to play your Lucas, whether you go down a more silver tongue route, being able to smooth talk most situations, or whether you want to be a straightforward brute that just beats people for confessions, or you can also just mix it up and throw hands when you don't want to be polite. Coming back to the Phoenix Wright comparison, there is a climax at the end of each chapter or at the end of each major event, which is basically a public confrontation where you will lay out the findings of your investigation in front of a crowd of people. Since your character is a former police officer, it's less legal courts where the final part of your investigation takes you, but rather the court of public opinion. Due to this, you can't really autopilot your way through the game. I wouldn't recommend taking long breaks between play sessions. This is more something to play consistently during your playthrough. You need to remember what's happened and what evidence has been gathered. If you pick the wrong options or make claims you can't substantiate, the crowd will not be in your favor, ultimately meaning the actual perpetrator may have the public on their side and get away with what they've done. Due to this, there are many endings in this game. There are a few major ones where your playthrough will end early depending on a choice you did or didn't make. Again, depending on the choices earlier or your standing with some characters, some choices may actually be locked out when you get into those confrontations, meaning you have no choice but to go with whatever options are there. To mix things up and make it a bit more interesting, there is the gameplay mechanic of the shadow. There is a creature, so to speak, called the Shadow that follows you in this game, and it will aid you in your investigations by allowing you to look back into the past to see what's happened once you've gathered sufficient evidence. This function is basically called a rewind because it will literally allow you to rewind time to see what's happened at a particular point in time and see who was there and what was said. It's a simple mechanic when first introduced and evolves a bit further into the late stages of the game. I do think this evolution was underutilized and had more potential. I could imagine a lot of cool ways this could have been further implemented into investigations or even dialogue options, but I won't specify what that evolution looks like as I think it's a bit of a spoiler and best left as a surprise for you. One of the major positives I really love about this game is the story branch map. After you complete a major ending at any point during your playthrough, you unlock access to the map. It will show you the progression of the story between all the chapters of the game. The great part is that you can see where the story diverges and you can choose to start your playthrough from any of those major points. So if you ended your playthrough early, you can pick back up where you finished, or if you managed to get all the way through and you wanted to see alternative endings, you can easily do that without having to replay the entire game. Using the story branch map meant some side quests were reset though. Not a big gripe, but would have been cool that previous choices up to that new starting point carried over. Not a major issue, but I thought I'd just bring it up anyway. I do think as time goes on and the devs continue to update this game, we probably will get an update. Something else I found while digging around in the settings is this feature where you can link the game to like Twitch or YouTube or Bilibili, I think it is, that's called, and basically you can stream this game and allow your viewers to actually choose what dialogue options or actions are taken. And this is just a really cool idea, not just for streamers or content creators looking to make a single player game more interactive and communal. It's also cool for people just wanting to play with a couple of friends and maybe play through it together. I haven't tested this feature, so I don't know if it works or if there's any issues with it at the moment, but it's neat to think that, that option is there. Another thing to consider is that you will do quite a bit of walking around in this game. It's inevitable that games of this nature will result in a lot of going from point A to B and back again. So you may find yourself looking all over everywhere, trying to trigger something or get a piece of dialogue to continue progress. I don't count this against the game, as it'll be like saying there's too much demand to press buttons in a fighting game. Also, there's a notebook to keep track of what you're investigating and where to go next, so you shouldn't get lost that often where you're just walking around aimlessly. Next, let's look at the aesthetics and the visuals of the game. Kill the Shadow is the only other game so far this year I wanted to play based mostly or solely on aesthetics. The Steam page describes the style of the game as pairing 3D HD environments with 2D pixel characters, creating a modern versus retro visual style. And that's a great way to describe it. I'm so curious about the dev choice to go with this style, as the more I played the game, the more the visual style seemed to be more suitable and made more sense. Not just in terms of visual appeal, but also it served the narrative and themes of this game really well, which we'll get into a little bit later. The environments are very well made and as such that you naturally want to walk around and explore, seeing what there is in the background and along the foreground that might not be immediately obvious. The standout for me is definitely the town environments, where thankfully a majority of the game takes place. I especially like the cutscenes where we got sweeping shots of the town too. It's just really pretty to see with really nice and popping colors in that 2.5D style. When you first enter town, it's great starting at the foreground of the environment and seeing the rest of the area in the background, and then being able to explore those areas. Gives the environment a sense of scale and depth, and it's interesting seeing 2D pixel characters occupying that space. The game also does a good job of utilizing verticality as well to help with that sense of space and giving you that sense of room to explore. In general, the camera does a great job of tracking you as you move through the environment. It also does a decent job of transitioning between open environments and closed ones. It tracks well when moving with you, whether it's going towards the background or towards the foreground. It isn't perfect, as there are times where you may be inside a building and walking to the foreground, creating a wall to pop in, which may be a bit jarring. Sometimes the camera can result in confusing perspectives with objects potentially blocking your point of view and so on. This wasn't a major issue for me, so it wasn't a bother, but can see this being an issue for others though. It probably will be patched and improved with in time. The other part I really liked about this game is the text of the dialogue and how much flair was put into it. You'll see throughout the game the text of a character's dialogue is often animated, capitalized, colored, stylized, and presented in so many different ways it's hard to lose track of what is said. This is a great move because naturally with games like this, it's easy to sort of lose interest or focus when dialogue, both spoken or thought, can kind of get a bit monotonous when it's presented in the same way each time. However, since this game switches it up drastically, it's not so easy to lose your attention. It also helps complement characters' personalities. Some characters might be loud and boisterous, so you'll see that in the way their dialogue is presented. Others are very guarded, so you may not actually see much animation or coloring going on. Even characters that are not all there or are prone to saying some crazy stuff will have their dialogue appear in equally crazy ways. Due to this, even though the characters are in 2D pixelated styles with no specific facial features, the dialogue helps you see what they're feeling and saying. There are also some moments where characters have exaggerated actions or reactions. It gets a bit absurd when, for instance, in the opening portion, you've got someone producing an insane amount of smoke from a cigarette. The game has absurd things like this happen, but not so frequent that it undermines the reality of the world, which is pretty grounded. And we'll mention it later on, but things like this also add to the game's humor, which this game has plenty of. The other way we know how characters are feeling and thinking is a bit more straightforward with the voice acting, and the voice acting in this game is really superb and I really enjoyed it, and it gave a lot of personality to these characters despite the 2D faceless pixel art style. I highly recommend playing this game in the game's native language, Mandarin or Chinese, apologies if I'm incorrect. I really enjoyed everyone's performances. There's a lot of heart going into these performances, or at least that's what it sounds like to me. The other cool thing about playing this in the original language is hearing how the voice actors perform the lines. In English, we may think of a particular line being delivered in a specific way, but then to hear the line being expressed differently in the original language shades the dialogue in a different way and gives a glimpse at potentially small things that might not come through perfectly in translation. Basically, it just adds a bit more spice to things.
太紧了，爹爹撑得好难受，体谅一下爹爹好吗？刚刚我开了3枪，现在这把枪里值，我如今也不清楚这3发子弹究竟在哪里。
One interesting thing that happened was playing in the original language and a flashback happened at this particular point in the game. Suddenly the game switched to English voice lines for some odd reason during that flashback, and then once I was back into the game, it went back to the original language voice lines. Only a one-time occurrence from memory and probably fixed by now, not a biggie but just something interesting. I also wanted to acknowledge the sound design in general. The sound of the atmosphere in each setting also helps gives environments that feeling of space and it being occupied by people. It also makes the world feel a bit more real despite the 2.5D pixel visuals. For example, right at the beginning mission when we start outside the police station, the sound design made it feel like I was outside a station at night in a village setting. The sounds themselves made me feel like I was hanging out somewhere outside of my parents' village in the islands.
"小光同志，你休假回来了。
Next, let's get on over to the narrative of the game. This game had an interesting plot, and I appreciate the pacing with how it progressed and revealed over the length of the game. It's basically a mystery our main character Lucas has been struggling to solve for 10 years. In current time, we begin with Lucas, where he's been stuck for 10 years in a place he was not meant to be at for this length of time. He initially was there investigating this mystery and then ended up stranded. As we go through the game, we will also make jumps into the past that gives us just as many answers as it does new questions. What starts as maybe something a bit more personal or limited in scope to Lucas and whoever else is involved, then sort of dramatically expands beyond that to being something that affects many more people. I also really liked where this narrative ultimately ends up depending on your choices. One of them speaks to a hopefulness people can have in trying and dire times, that despite what we may see constantly, we can make a different choice to spark a change rather than boxing ourselves into a paradigm we believe is our only choice. And that's always a good message, especially now in this day and age, I guess. That was a bit broad, as I don't want to get into the story too much to avoid spoilers, but to contextualize that, we can look at some themes the game gives us. Some of them are tradition and our blind adherence to it that allows old corrupt power structures to remain and flourish, how good people can end up complicit in corruption or turning a blind eye to it, trauma and how it affects people and how it shows itself in their behavior. Another thing about the narrative is how characters are not all they seem to be. Again, not wanting to delve deeper on this as it would give away too much if you're watching this before playing the game. These characters have depth and we are given an insight into why they behave or think the way they do. This also makes you kind of reflect on yourself too. You will wonder whether you had the right measure of a person or if you were maybe too kind or harsh to them when you initially interacted with them. I previously mentioned how the visual approach of the game helped with the narrative. Please keep in mind some of the events in this game are pretty heavy and maybe triggering for some people. They're not all explicitly shown but are alluded to or outright mentioned. We deal with heavy subject matters like murders, torture, abuse, trafficking, addiction. These are really heavy topics but presented with a disarming visual style. And that's where I believe the visual style works well. It helps give a bit of much needed levity, and the pixel style just kind of gives a bit of a buffer when these topics come up. I imagine if the same game instead had more realistic graphics or attempted to go a more serious visual style, it would get depressing very quickly. What also helps with the heavy subjects is the writing and humor. This game isn't 100% serious all the time. There's a liberal amount of humor and some really funny moments to help break things up, and that's a testament to great writing. When you can see humor and more serious topics handled with the same competence, to me that's great writing. Now it's time for some observations from my 29 plus hours playing this game. The game does something cool with achievements. For some achievements you can unlock and get rewards that will help you with subsequent playthroughs. For instance, I mentioned that this game will result in a lot of walking. One of the achievements lets you unlock the run option, which may be kind of stupid to some people, but I find it to be amusing. This is a neat way to encourage replays with new games and makes achievements something worthwhile to earn. Speaking of replayability, I could not see an option to adjust difficulty. If I missed it, that's typical of me, but I couldn't see it, and being able to raise or lower difficulty is always appreciated, not just in terms of accessibility for players, I'm a huge fan of that, but also in terms of replayability. I did have some issues when first booting up the game on release and with the playtest itself. I do think they pushed a hotfix where you can launch the game in a different way if it crashes. I ended up using that option all the time and the game worked fine from then on. I don't hold this against the game as the game was not Steam Deck verified before release. Overall, this game works well on the Steam Deck. There is a bit of a ever so slight lag when playing on the Steam Deck without messing with the settings. However, it wasn't noticeable to an extent where it made the game unplayable. I didn't bother adjusting my settings to get it 100% smooth, as it didn't really bother or annoy me enough and was barely noticeable unless I specifically looked for it. The game works great whether played in handheld mode or docked. Handheld mode is fine and comfortable to play. Controls feel mostly intuitive, and if you do get stuck trying to navigate menus or such, you can resort to the touchscreen. The one instance I prefer to use a mouse, however, is with the investigation process when you're connecting clues and evidence. While the controls on Steam Deck or controller are pretty great, it just feels more natural to use a mouse to point and click to link evidence. I prefer to play this game docked and using a controller. The game worked well on my aftermarket PS4 controller, which has mean stick drift. Fortunately, the stick drift didn't impact the game too much aside from the investigation portions, and that's when I'll just end up using the mouse anyway. Alright, let's wrap this up with the too long didn't read. What rating will we give Kill the Shadow out of 10, and is this game worth your hard-earned or ill-gotten money. Let's start with the rating. This game overall to me is a brilliant game. I thoroughly enjoy the gameplay and narrative. I love the visual style, and I thought this game had a lot of personality. Working in its favor is that I played it at an ideal time in my life, where the themes and messages of this game just really hit home a bit more. Now that's my biased take on the game, and if I were to go with my bias, I would rate this game a 9 out of 10. However, that would only be a 9 out of 10 personally. What I want to do instead is try and remove my bias and remove my preferences and try to look at this game a bit more objectively. And when I do that, the score that I would actually give the game is a fluctuating solid 7.5 to a moderate 8 out of 10. The game doesn't have enough holding it back where it's less than a 7.5, but it's not completely solid enough where it's at the very least a definitive 8. I feel 7.5 to 8 is fair. What's holding this game back is, for example, dialogue and skill checks being pretty basic, where these are fundamental to the gameplay. While I myself may not find that to be an issue, some may think it's too simplified and instead wonder why we are given choices at all. Maybe it would have just been best to just have the narrative be linear and straightforward. The same story would be told, no? And while I like the narrative, I don't think it's anything groundbreaking or something we haven't seen before. No difficulty option either is something basic the game should have. I also wanted to add that I could swear there was a disclaimer about AI use in this game for translation purposes on the Steam page. I don't know if that's now hidden or if they've removed all things they used for AI and ended up getting a person to do it. I may even be wrong, but I thought it's important to raise this as some people may not support games with any AI use at all. Probably going forward, I'm going to screenshot these Steam pages because I'm now questioning if my memory is in fact correct. So those are a couple of examples of what's preventing this game being an objective 9 rather than it actually just being a personal 9 to me. Next, is this game worth your hard-earned or ill-gotten money? On release, I was able to purchase this game at a discount for $22.49 New Zealand. Full price looked to be about $24.99 New Zealand. For that price, I can get some fizzy drinks and snacks delivered from my local 24/7 convenience store for a late night gaming session after everyone in the house is asleep. Would I rather get that or play this game? Kill the Shadow is worth the money. I would have paid full price too. I've gotten about 29 plus hours out of this game doing a complete playthrough, making it to the end. I genuinely enjoyed my time and the experience. I think I'll also get some more mileage out of this doing another playthrough later on when I've forgotten about parts of the story. I will follow this dev team and publisher because if they have upcoming content or release something else, I've enjoyed this game enough to give the next one a crack. We'll keep an eye out on the AI disclaimers though, because I swear I saw one. Anyways, thanks for making it to the end of the video. If you stuck around, those are my opinions on Kill the Shadow. Please leave a comment if you have played it. I will also be trying to stream some games I am in the process of reviewing. It would be fun to share real-time thoughts as I go through a game before finalizing them in a review, especially as there are some funny moments that don't make it into the review. I wanted to do this especially with Wolverine soon to be released, but I might do a test run with another game first to get that set up. I'll also look to try and release some other content that's a bit more shorter and more frequent besides my reviews, not to just get stuff out there, but it helps break up my review process and schedule from being a bit too mechanical. Until next time, off out.